start recording and let's broadcast. All right, let's
Excellent.
see. All right. So we'll just wait for a little bit and wait. Oh, we've got 9 people on. We've got 4 people on with us.
We probably know those 4 people, right?
I hope so.
Well, otras musas.
Yeah. All right, 14. That's good. That's fantastic. Welcome everybody. And we're gonna just wait a minute or two and wait till some people jump in. In the meantime, I'll tell you a story about a murder that I witnessed a couple days ago. It was
my God.
a little.
I saw you tweet about this.
I tell you, there's a war happening right outside my window, and there are like 4 nests in my bougainvillea bush, and I've got this huge bougainvillea bush, and it's been so hard. It's been so hard to witness because I could hear the babies going pew pew pew, and the mamas are coming in all day. Man, they are hustling and giving those babies, and then the crows try and swoop in, and the other like aggressive birds, and oh man. Anyway, so it's been tragedy after tragedy. And yesterday
That's hard.
I was in my kitchen. I hear a little boy say, "Oh, poor baby bird." And he went outside. I went outside, and the little boy was looking at this bird. It was the bird that had been killed in the nest. They had taken it out of the nest and just dropped it on the street.
Oh,
no. There's this. And in the meantime, I'm like fighting with my kids, and I'm like, "You're gonna get pecked out the nest."
Mira esto. You see what's happening?
What happens? All right, so we've got 20 people. My goodness, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Aida Salazar, and I'm going to be your moderator today. To this fantastic panel called Our Voices, Our Protest, Migrant Stories in Latinx Literature. But before we formally begin, I wanted us to acknowledge the suffering in the world, all of the deaths and the illness that we are seeing across the globe because of this pandemic. And I wanted to ground us in gratitude and in reverence, but also in hope and in wishes for wellness and safety for all beings and Mother Earth, and in the wish that our work as storytellers will continue to be a contribution to healing. And I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm on Ohlone land here in Oakland, California. And if you know the original inhabitants of where you are, please take a moment to acknowledge them as the first peoples and the first caretakers of where you call home. All right, so thank you. So I'm gonna start with bios. Romina Garber is, así se pronuncia? Garber?
Sí. Romina Garber.
Romina Garber is a New York Times and international bestselling author whose books include Lobizona. Can you hold it up for us? You have it?
Sí, por supuesto. There you go.
Lobizona and the Zodiac series. Born in Argentina and raised in Miami, Romina wrote her first poem at age 9. Si yo fuera la luz. Oh, how beautiful.
Si yo fuera la luz. Te cargo.
And hasn't stopped writing since. So welcome and thank you for being here, Romina.
Thank you.
All right, so, and then we have Yamile Saied Méndez, a football-obsessed Argentine-American who loves meteor showers, summer astrology, and pizza.
Pizza every day. I wish.
She lives in Utah with her Puerto Rican husband and their 5 kids, 2 adorable dogs, and 1 majestic cat. That's a handful. That's a real.
Yeah, tell me about it.
She's an inaugural Walter Dean Myers Grant recipient and graduated from Voices of Our Nation, BONNA, and the Vermont College of Fine Arts MFA Writing for Children's and Young Adult program. Her books include Where Are You From? Blizzard Besties, Random Acts of Kittens, and On These Magic Shores, and Furia. Are you holding up your book? On These Magic Shores?
Yes, On These Magic Shores. Yes.
All right. Welcome y gracias por estar.
Thank you. Gracias.
Alexandra, Alex, we call her Alex, has always loved telling stories, though not always with words. She has a BFA in painting, an MA, and an MA in combined media, and that's art school speak for making work out of anything.
That is true.
Me gusta. Born in New Jersey to immigrant parents, Alex has the privilegio of dreaming in both English and Spanish. Her debut young adult novel, The Grief Keeper, was a fall 2019 Junior Library Guild selection and is a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award 2020. Ay, buena suerte y felicidades. Gracias por estar.
You never know.
Sí, sí, sí. Jenny Torres Sanchez is a full-time writer, former English teacher. She was born in Brooklyn, New York, but has lived on the border of two worlds her whole life. She is the author of 5 novels for young adults, The Fall of Innocence, which was named a Kirkus Best YA book in 2018, and Death, Dickinson, and the Demented Life of Frenchie Garcia was named a Kirkus Best Book in 2013. Her third novel, Because of the Sun, received a Florida Book Award Gold Medal. Jenny also contributed to the anthologies Hope Nation and Our Stories, Our Voices. This kind of sounds like our panel, right?
It does, yes.
Her next novel, We Are Not From Here. Where is it? Come on. There it is. We Are Not From Here is about the plight of 3 Guatemalan migrant teens aboard the death train known as La Bestia, and will be published May 19, 2020 by Penguin Random House. Welcome. And I'm so excited. You're on your 4th star review. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Yay.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Felicidades. And I'm Aida Salazar. I'm an arts activist and author of the verse novels The Moon Within and the upcoming Land of the Cranes, which is right here. I've got a couple books coming, a picture book called Jovita Wore Pants and the story of a revolutionary fighter. And I'm co-editing an anthology called Calling the Moon with Jami. And it's an anthology of it's an anthology by writers of color on menstruation. And I'm also a very proud founding member of Las Musas, an unprecedented Latinx debut group in Kidlit. All right, so that's us. That's us. Welcome everybody, and thank you to all the people who are with us right now. We're 28 people strong. That's fabulous. All right, so I wanted to kind of set a context for this panel before I dive into questions, and you know, people following us at home know that there'll be time for you to ask questions, and you're welcome to make comments on the chat if you feel inspired. All right, so we all know that in the last few years and before, we've seen a particularly harsh and heinous anti-immigrant and anti-Latinx sentiment and policies against immigrants and migrants coming especially from the US-Mexico border and Muslim. The poem emblazoned on the Statue of Liberty, written by Emma Lazarus, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." It stands in bitter contrast to the reality that nearly 70,000 immigrant children, the majority of whom were from Latin America, were held in US custody in 2019. Now, if you think about how many people that is, that's like enough to fill an NFL stadium. Mm-hmm. So last year, Las Musas led a group of Latinx kidlit writers to raise their voices to protest the injustices with a unified video statement, which I'd love to share with you in a little bit. And it came under the hashtag Our Voices Are Protest, and this is why we titled this panel. This is issue that has affected our communities and to which we've responded for a really long time through efforts like Our Voices, Our Protest, and like Dignidad Literaria, hashtag Dignidad Literaria. So, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is in a second. So our panel is going to delve into how Latinx literary work opens up conversations, not only about the injustices committed against migrants, but also about the role Latinx books do and must take in shaping the narrative of this experience. So let me see if I can share this video with you. Excuse me, sorry. Give me a second. All right, so let's share my screen. Share. We'll see all my junk, y'all. Here you go. The migrant story.
The migrant story.
The migrant story.
The migrant story is our story.
We are the descendants of immigrants.
We are immigrants. We're descendants of ancestors indigenous to these lands.
From them, we all rise.
Yet in this America,
state-sanctioned policies of imprisonment and terror along the border and across the U.S.
destroy families and communities of color and the very fabric of our nation.
As authors for children, our work is part of the human chain.
The brown and black links that seek to create a bridge for all our brothers and sisters.
Our work is a prayer, our poetry, our memory.
Our voices, our protest.
We do not consent to the inhumane treatment of any migrant.
we do not consent to the imprisonment of refugee and immigrant families in concentration camps.
We do not consent to the separation of children from their caregivers.
We do not consent to massive ICE raids of migrants in our cities.
We do not consent to allowing U.S. corporations to profit from this terror.
We do not consent that our government creates and supports these inhumane conditions.
We do not consent to the molestation and rapes.
We do not consent to the deaths.
Do not consent.
We do not consent.
We do not consent.
No estamos de acuerdo y nunca estaremos de acuerdo.
We seek justice in the present to ensure the future of goodness and beauty on our planet.
Across our hearts, our voices will be a wall of resistance and rebellion to the racism, sexism, and homophobia that is responsible for these violations of human rights.
All right.
I love that so much.
What's that?
I love that so much.
Yes, I always get chills.
Yeah, such a beautiful video. It really is.
It sure is. All right. So I wondered if you guys...
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another webinar from Las Musas. My name is Mayra Cuevas.
We're overlapping.
That was Las Musas, our video, our YouTube channel.
That is very funny.
It was just going.
I just thought you had Myra under your desk. And I was
That's
like,
what I thought too. Like, it got hacked.
All right, so why don't you guys tell us a little bit about your book and your connection to your story?
How do we go?
Whoever, it's okay. Why don't you start?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so my book On These Magic Shores, it was slated to be published on April 21st, but because of everything going on, it has been pushed to June 9th. And I'm actually very relieved about this decision. I started writing this book in 2014. It's a very personal story about three sisters who were born here in the US, but other than their mother, they have no other family. And Minerva, the main character, she wants to be the first Latina president of the US. She has these dreams and she has a plan set out, and she thinks she has to achieve certain things in order for her to become the president. The very first thing she needs to do is get the part of Wendy in the Peter Pan play that her school's putting up. And the day of the auditions, her mom doesn't come back from her second job. So she brings her two little sisters along. Coda is 6 years old and Abby is 2. So she brings both of them along, and she's so stressed and so intimidated by the other kids. And of course, she will not get that part. And that's not a spoiler. It says so right there on the back copy. And she gets cast as Tiger Lily because she's the only brown girl at school. And she's just furious about it. So besides fighting the system and trying to change her school philosophy of playing Peter Pan, which is a very harmful story when we consider that they portray Native Americans as fictional characters. So she sets out on this fight to change how the play is presented. And also she has to deal at home with the pain of taking care of her sisters without telling anybody because of the news. She's so scared of people finding out and somebody taking her sisters and them being pulled apart. So it's very personal to me. I wrote it right after my mom passed away in 2013. When I was a little girl, my biggest fear was losing my mother. And I've been thinking that for immigrants that leave everything behind, their roots, their photographs, their support system, when you go to another country, your family is your home. It doesn't matter where you're living or your situation. And to lose your mother is to lose everything that you are, especially being a child. So there's a little bit of magical realism in the story. She gets a little help from fairies, Los Peques, that her mother calls. And so I'm excited for readers to get to know my little Miranda sisters.
I'm so excited. I can go next if you like.
Sure.
My book is The Grief Keeper. It came out last June, which seems like no time at all, and also like 1,000 years ago. It is about two sisters from El Salvador, Marisol and Gabby, who flee their country due to the violence there. And they come to the United States hoping that they can make a new life and escape the violence, but instead they are detained by immigration. And through sort of a quirk in the system, they are given an unusual choice. If Marisol participates in a cutting-edge technological sort of experimentation for a device that transfers grief from one person to another, then she's told that she and her sister will be given asylum in this country. And so there's a speculative element, but it's very much, this story takes place in this world as we know it. It's not such a distance to think of that burden that we put on immigrants of how much will you do, what will you sacrifice? And that's really where the idea for The Grief Keeper came from. I came from immigrant parents, so I'm first generation. And also we lived in a community where there were all kinds of immigrants from all kinds of countries, and there really wasn't anything that you wouldn't do and nothing you wouldn't sacrifice. So I thought, well, you know, if you can take on all of this physical labor and, you know, to the point where parts of the family would come over and then just send money back to their families. You all know this. It's so common in our experience, but that would mean being away from their family for years, for decades sometimes, and then sometimes not being able to go home. But thinking about that really made me think, well, what if it wasn't only that physical work, but it was also the emotional labor of taking on somebody else's grief, anxiety, and trauma. And I thought, wow, if there was a way for somebody to commoditize that, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody did. So that's really what the basis of The Grief Keeper comes from. And then when I had that sort of idea, I thought, well, who would be the person that would be giving Marisol her grief? And I thought of an American teenager who also is impacted by trauma, but in a very different way. So the trauma of Ray's experience through a very privileged lens, and how these two girls sort of come together. And spoiler alert, I mean, it's on the cover, right?
Yes.
And eventually find each other and fall in love. And in one of the many things, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this later too, about you know, as you mentioned, I think someone mentioned, or in an email, someone mentioned the danger of a single story. You know, I really wanted to look at issues of depression and also LGBTQ identity that I don't see a lot I see it, but not as much, and certainly not when I was growing up, very limited, with a Latinx protagonist. So all those things went into the hopper when I was thinking about this story and these two sisters.
Beautiful. All right, Romina?
Sure.
Okay.
Jen, do you want to go?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so my book is Lo Bisona, and it was also pushed. So it was actually supposed to come out May 5th, and it's now slated for August 4th due to everything going on. So I haven't even been able to hold the hardcover yet. It's hard. Anyway, so Lo Bisona, as you can tell, is based in Spanish lore. Specifically, it's mythology that that can be found all over the world, really, but I'm using the Argentine spin for obvious reasons. So it deals with, well, it follows a girl named Manu, short for Manuela, who's Argentine, and she is living with her mom in Miami in hiding because they're undocumented. But beyond just being undocumented, Manu has very strange eyes. And so if she was to be seen, she would just draw too much attention, which would lead to questions. So she really has to have a very cloistered life. And so one day there's an ICE raid and her mom is taken. And so left alone, Manu finally decides to follow clues to find out who her father was and why they were running from his criminal family in the first place to come to Miami. And she kind of, through a series of things, she kind of leads her into the Everglades, where of course is a magical land. And she discovers that she's not entirely human. And it's not just her residency that's illegal, but her existence. And so I really wrote this thinking about labels and language. I mean, I've always been fascinated by language. You know, we joked in my bio that I wrote that poem when I was 9. And the truth is, it was the first thing I'd ever written. And it was right after I graduated ESOL classes, you know, after immigrating here from Argentina and kind of speaking English well enough that I was considered okay to be in regular classes. And I had panic attacks. I couldn't read. I was like, I can't pronounce anything. It was terrible. And then our teacher read to us from Shel Silverstein's Where the Sidewalk Ends. And I heard like poetry for the first time. And it didn't really matter that it was in English and I didn't understand half of it. It was just that sound of making music without instruments, it blew me away. And I just started writing poems, and in Spanish, of course. And so I wrote that poem, Si yo fuera la luz, iluminaría la avestruz. Like, and all these like, and it was silly. I was 9, but I until then I was a very mute kid, and we thought it was due to my anxiety from coming to this country. My parents thought maybe I needed to talk to someone, I needed speech therapy or something, but it was writing that really opened me up. And my Spanish teacher submitted it to a county fair and I won first place. And it was like the first time I felt good at anything, you know, and it changed my life, you know. And of course everything I wrote was Spanglish until I got to a point that it changed to English. And the first time I really went back to it when I was older was in this book, which in 2008 was called Yellow Eyes. And I tried to get it published. And it was, again, about this Argentine Lo Bisona lore that I'll leave a little mysterious, but, you know, I was very much, it was about Argentine immigrants here in school and whatever. And the reaction I got from agents was basically, we don't, you know, readers here don't care about Argentine immigrants. They don't want to read stories about, and it was like really at the time, so shocking that I stopped writing about my heritage altogether, you know, and it really shut me down in that sense. And of course I ended up getting published with Zodiac, and, you know, Zodiac was so much easier to write because I think when you create your own world, like with kind of fictitious worlds or continents and whatnot, you can remove the charge of talking about different nations and different people and everything. And so people are more accepting of it. But of course, when everything started happening at the border and kids were in cages, and I kind of realized I'd given up my power, and I really should have fought, and I didn't. And I regretted it. And so I picked up this book, dusted it off, rewrote it completely, obviously more reflective of today. And it walks a fine line between contemporary and fantasy. And I know that can be a little strange, but it really speaks to what I want to say. And I know Shamina can talk to this, but in Argentina, we had the Guerra Sucia. My parents met at the end of it, but there were very similarities in the sense of children were separated from their families.
Yes.
And I think that was why it was so important for me to use Argentine mythology in this story, because it's a warning, a very real warning that ideas are not contained by borders.
Exactly.
Okay, that sounds amazing. I'm so upset that the day has been pushed off because I wanted to read it like immediately. I wrote We Are Not From Here. The day for it is the publishing date is still May 19th. I'm happy about, because I do want this story to be out in the world. It seems like it's really taken a long time for it to come out. It's a story about 3 migrant teens from Guatemala who are fleeing danger from their country, from their where they live in Puerto Barrios, Guatemala, which is actually where my mother's from, and I visited there several times. My mother's from Guatemala and my dad's from El Salvador. And when I saw the news of what was happening to children coming from Central America, the danger that they found themselves in, so many feelings came up in me. Sadness and love for those children, and anger at them having to flee a place that they love, and then the way that they were treated, and basically refused any help or any refuge. So I started writing this years ago, and it actually got when we first started hearing about children kind of boarding La Bestia and coming over here in really dangerous ways. And it was actually rejected by another editor. Just my general impression was that, this book kind of wasn't commercial enough, or, those stories weren't really stories that people cared about, which really angered me, but also kind of, made me not afraid to write the book, but just not sure how it would be, or if it would be, welcomed in the world in any way. So I ended up kind of shelving it for a while, and I wrote another book with another editor that was published, and that was The Fall of Innocence. And then, this book kept coming to me in pieces, and it was just one of those things that just doesn't leave you alone. And so, I was actually under contract to write a different book. And I told my editor, I have to write this book. I have to write this book, and it needs to be out there. And this was a different editor than the one that had rejected it. And she said, absolutely, let's do it. Let's just put this one, and let's, get this story out there. So it's about 3 teens named Pulga, Pequeña, and Chico, who, go on this really dangerous journey, and it's just a very close-up look at what sends them running and the different journeys that they have, even though they are all together on this one journey together. So yeah, I'm really thrilled that it's going to be out. I'm really sad that it is a story that is such a reality for so many children out there. But I really do want and hope that the world stands up and listens. So.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna share a little bit about my book, Land of the Cranes. I have terrible lighting in this basement where I am. Land of the Cranes is a story about Betita. She's a 9-year-old child, Mexicana, who was brought over as a baby when her family was fleeing cartel violence. And she was raised in the United States, and things turn kind of tragic for her when her father gets swept up in an immigration raid at work and is immediately deported. And then when she and her mother go to try and meet him at Friendship Park in San Diego, they miss the exit, and they end up in Mexico. When they try to come back, they're taken to into an immigration processing center, which is the kind of processing centers that we see are called like Hilera and whatnot. And so she is a poet, and she believes that she is a bird because her father had told her about the Aztec myth that said that the Aztecs descended from a place called Aztlan, which has been translated to Land of the Cranes. And they left Aztlan to found their great city in the navel of the universe, Tenochtitlan, and that one day the prophecy said that they would return to live among the cranes. And so she thinks she's a bird. and she believes all migrants should be free to fly as cranes. But she gets eventually caged with her mother, who is pregnant, in the detention center. She writes picture poems to her father, who's in Mexico, about what she sees inside the detention center. And and like you all, this is for our communities. These are not new experiences. This is not a trend. This is not. This comes from our real lived experiences and our own empathy for our communities. I was undocumented. I was brought over as a baby, and I was raised till, I don't know, till I was like 12, 13 years old is when we received our green cards. So I know very intimately what it feels to live in the shadows, to fear la migra, to know plenty of people, cousins and nieces and nephews and uncles and aunts who have been lost on their journey to the United States, or incarcerated, or or deported. So these are stories that stem from a very real reality. And for me, I wrote this story. It came to me in a very kind of muse to writer way. I was just writing. I was doing like a practical exercise on a picture book, and the voice of this 9-year-old child just came to me, and I just wrote down. And before I was done, 3 hours later, I had 30 pages of pretty much exactly what the book is. I don't think I've changed. I changed maybe like a few poems, but it's exactly as I wrote it. And I feel like, it was a communication. I felt like this spirit, this voice was in the room telling me what I needed to write and how I needed to write it. And so for me, it was a very urgent story. And by the end of the week, I didn't stop writing. I kept writing. And by the end of the week, I knew exactly what had taken place inside this detention center for this little girl. And, I came up from the page and my face was awash in tears because it was so painful. It was so painful to have been the channel for this experience. And I've never been inside a detention center, but I know intimately the stories from my community, and that's why I wrote this book. And this book was sold in February, the February before the world's eyes turned their attention to the border situation, the border, when the children were being separated. And I was finishing it as this whole thing was kind of popping off on the national stage. And so anyway, so that's Land of the Cranes. It's coming out September 15th this year. So All right, so let's move us along. We've got some questions. I want to, we have about an hour and a half. And so, at any point that you want to get off, you're welcome to. But we don't have them. I don't have that many questions for you guys because I want to make sure that we can open it up for discussion for people at the end. We've already got some great questions, and just hold tight, everybody, because we'll get to them. All right. So in the context of today's, incredibly divided and hostile political world and the new world that we are and will be living because of this pandemic. Is there a way to use the voices of these stories to further the empathy and the understanding about an issue that has in many respects now fallen once again into the shadows because of this pandemic? What do you think? Empathy. Empathy and understanding.
So it's something that I struggle with because it is so, I feel like people's attention is sort of fractured, and for good reasons. I mean, there are economic worries everyone has, there are health worries everyone has. My mother is 82 years old and a dialysis patient. I worry about her because every other day she goes out into the world. So there's that level of worry which is suddenly kind of on fire. But at the same time, there are, not only is this issue still there, it's actually being exacerbated, whether in detention centers, there are fears that the coronavirus is spreading. There's no, we can go along into this, but there's no clear plan or action from the government on how this is. So there's a lot of a generalized anxiety that I have as well. And the only thing I come back to that I have any control on is the books that we write and the books that we hold up and give attention to and talk about. So I will do this until my dying day. I had the pleasure of reading We Are Not From Here early. Mm-hmm. And so damn good. And I will shed a light on that book when it comes out and forever, because that's what I can do. That's all that I can do right now. I can continue to write my stories, continue to lift up other Latinx authors the way that we do in Las Musas. And because I feel like when I encounter, when I do readings and signings, when I encounter non-Latinx people who are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that, and not only just the immigration part, because my book also deals with what happens after you get to this country. So how you are treated as a person who is, how you are othered, how you are, all the ways from language to how you're thought of as being less intelligent because you have an accent, like a long list. And, telling these stories is how we build empathy. So telling our own stories, I know it seems, to me anyway, sometimes it seems inadequate to write books. Like, shouldn't I go try to give CPR? I don't know how to give CPR. So inadequate to be an artist and to make work, but it's not. It's the foundation of how we, as Aida said, how we build empathy, and especially when we write for children.
Yes, I agree. I think shining a light, like you said, is absolutely necessary, and it is what we can do. And it does feel sometimes like, what are we really doing when we're creating art, right? Like, are we really doing something? Are we really having an impact? Are we really helping those things that or those issues that we think need to be brought to light? And we know that we are, but sometimes as we're doing that and we're creating and we're writing stories, it does feel a little bit like, oh gosh, is this enough? But I do think it's important. I think it's important to share those stories and to make sure that they're out there and that they exist, and that once they do exist, that people are paying attention to it. Us shining light on each other's works, on each other's books. And also it's my hope that, our books are brought into the classroom and taught to students so that they can see and discuss and analyze what is going on, among themselves. And just so, that it's out there, and that teachers are helping to guide students through these difficult conversations. And I keep forgetting my train of thought. Sorry.
And librarians, teachers and librarians, you know?
Yes.
Like even the librarian from my daughter's elementary school is having like sort of these extracurricular, hey, I thought of this book for you. And you know, this kind of she does not have to do this, but she is doing that. And I feel like that even now when everyone is so distant and so preoccupied, you know, those people, teachers, authors, artists, librarians have an important role.
Yes. And especially with young adults, because, you know, I find this is why I write for young adults, is that they are such a open-minded, you know, audience, and they also want fairness and they want justice. And I think putting these kinds of books in the hands of young adults is so important because it can make such an impression on them, and it can really shape their way of thinking and their way of being in the world.
Yeah, I think it's particularly important now that when we're finding out about the statistics every day, oh, so many people got sick today, or so many people died. It was the same thing as when we were getting the news from the border, so many children are put away and separated from their parents. Sometimes numbers, I love numbers. I'm an economist by my first profession, but numbers sometimes can remove us and remove our humanity from the faces behind these numbers. And I feel like our stories, we as artists, as writers, we paint these images of these people's faces and desires and dreams into readers' minds, right? And so I feel like it's a privilege that we have to show that these people that are being separated from their parents, or these essential workers that are risking their lives every day to make sure, you know, we can go to the supermarket and get our food or be treated at the hospital if we do get sick. A high percentage of these essential workers are members of the Latinx community or people of color. And they're the ones that get dehumanized sometimes by the news, and they're the same people that are today being hailed as our heroes. So by our words, we can show these faces that get hidden behind the numbers.
That is such a good point. And
Yeah.
I mean, and more so what you were saying about this time in particular, I think because what's happening right now is actually making us, unfortunately, enforce borders rather than open stuff up. And for a while, I think we're going to be looking at a time of fragmented society, in a sense, like where, you know, not even just globally, but even among in our own state, in our own country, and everything is going to have to be barrio por barrio, so to speak, you know? So like, I think that more than ever, these stories are important because we need to be those bridges, you know, and we need to remind everyone that like, yeah, but you know what? This person in this country is going through the exact same thing you're going through here, just like it looks different. It's a different picture. Let me draw it for you. Let me remind you how we're all exactly the same. Let's not let this blip, you know, make us forget let us forget that, you know. And the other reason, timing wise, most importantly, is we have an election, and we cannot let people forget all the atrocities this administration has been behind. And we need to be in everybody's faces because they're not going to be thinking about it right now for good reason. But we need to be like reminding them, hey, when you're going in November, remember this, remember this, remember these names and these faces and these stories.
Absolutely. You know, you guys all bring up such incredible points, but and I almost I almost hate to bring in American Dirt, but because it's a shame to have to put our work in the context of American Dirt. But we would be really remiss if we didn't, right? And so I want to know what you think about the controversy and the response by Presente.org and Dignidad Literaria in particular, and what do you think that has done for the subsequent books about Latinx immigration, including your own? What do you think that has done? Like, what do you think about that controversy and the response, and then what do you think it's going to do for your book? Or
so I when my book was on submission in 2017, I will not name names, but we had someone pass on it and they said, I love this book so much, it touched my heart, all the nice things. But unfortunately, we already bought an immigration story because there can obviously only be one. That was 2017. And from that point to now, I think one thing that hopefully is, it's got a double-edged sword, but hopefully is that there are lots of immigration. Obviously, we all know this, but there's not only just one immigration story. There's lots of different kinds of immigrants and lots of different focuses. So when the American Dirt thing happened, what I loved is that immediately we had all these bloggers come out and say, yeah, so listen, would you like a list of some real Latinx writers who are writing about these same things and doing it with authority and doing it with the care that it should have had from the beginning? Here's a list, you know? And I thought that was, I don't know if that would have happened in 2017. So I'm trying to be a little more positive. I think that there has been some movement in the direction of like, we call BS, you know, we call BS on this, you know, and Dignidad Literaria is obviously part of that. I have not read American Dirt. I don't plan on reading American Dirt. My TBR of Latinx authors who I know and who are amazing is quite long. I'm gonna start with that. And then maybe if time, you know, way down the line, but probably not. So I feel like we have this work, this canon exists, continues to exist and to be published in beautiful different ways. So, you know, has it affected me? No, in the sense that, you know, I feel like my particular story was out there. It makes me sad that someone like Oprah Winfrey would have put her, you know, seal of approval on this book that so many people say is flawed in this way, just, you know, just being a very two-dimensional representation. But the flip side is that it has made people say, hold up, no. You're ignoring this entire canon, and let me show you and tell you what that is.
Yeah. What I have to say about that is that I don't like that what, you know, the controversy behind that book made the issue at hand, which was migrants and the dangers and the struggles that they face, it made it take a back burner. And you know what the story was about, and you know, other books that have, you know, those stories that try to shine a light on those stories. It kind of put, you know, the migrant experience as secondary, and that was really upsetting to see. But I think that the controversy did help to uncover problems within publishing, which is, you know, that there are so many Latinx voices out there, and there are so many Latinx authors out there, and we're not, you know, we're not showcased or you know, like kind of our books are not brought to light in that same way, and that's a problem. You know, a lot of people don't know that our books exist because nobody is saying these books exist in you know, from high places where it does make a difference.
Yeah, something that made me think about that American Dirt made me think about was that how sometimes our books are only shared with people from our own community who are, you know, my main target audience. But I feel like I can speak for all of us when I say that my desire is not only for a Latinx child to read this book, it's also meant to be a little window into the lives of my characters. And I felt like there was an article that I read that said that because American Dirt was told from a woman who had previously identified as white, that it would be more approachable for a predominantly white audience. And it made me think how sometimes we as readers put a little barrier, oh, this book is not written for me, without even giving it a chance, or without sharing it with the children in our life because we think that there's nothing that they can gain from it. But although I've never been a teen running away from a gang in Guatemala, like in Jenny's book, I felt for those characters, and I could see their humanity. And from all of the books of yours that I have read, there is something that I can, that resonates with me. So it just made me more aware that sometimes when I write, I need to be a little more unapologetical of what makes my character different, that it doesn't, that my writing doesn't really need to cater to anybody's gaze, but it just needs to be authentic. Because when it's authentic, that's when it's going to resonate with the readers.
Yeah, I feel like everything has been covered so well. I don't want to take up too much time because we have questions, but the bottom line is I agree. I think the headline is authenticity matters, and I feel like that's what came out of that. I do worry the message was lost a little bit because a lot of people who were upset about the criticism were labeling it as like, well, we're not allowed to write about anybody else, you know, and that was not the criticism at all. And there's a lot of people who write about different races, different nationalities, different everything with respect, research, they do the job and everything, and nobody is criticizing anyone and saying you're only allowed to write this person and you can. That was not, and so it really bothered me when that became the reductive sort of message that got spread. And it's problematic because what you guys were saying is so true. We were talking about the issues in publishing, in the system that don't allow these voices. And this is a common thing that we'll probably get into, but that we see when people have power and privilege, like their whole trick, the whole illusion they pull on us is they make us think there's 5 seats at the table and one of them is from a marginalized background. So you're all competing for that one seat. They don't want us to gang up like this and realize, hey, you know, there are 4 other seats. Why are we only competing for the same one? How much stronger are we together supporting our stuff? And like, let's take over that whole bestsellers list and that whole shelf. Why? Why not? Right. You know, it's like when Ruth Bader Ginsburg is like, I'll be happy when there's 9 women justices.
Yes.
Why not? You know?
Absolutely. And I think that the work of Dignidad Literaria, Miriam Gerber, David Bowles, and Roberto Lovato and Presente.org, I think, you know, putting a political organizing mechanism behind those statements was, I think, the pivotal and kind of really politically smart thing to do for us, because they were positing us in you know, they made us have a seat at the table. They insisted that we had, you know, 4 seats at the table, and that's really powerful. And I think we did, even amidst the pandemic, we did see they hired a Latinx editor at Macmillan. That's really fantastic. And also, I did, you know, even in my own publisher, you know, as we're getting ready to market my book, I'm like, this is not going to be a cutesy marketing. There will be no cutesy marketing. This is a very serious book, about a very serious topic, and I will not be, you know, doing, you know, stupid promotional, you know, XYZs. You know, everything that we do is going to have dignity. It's going to have and be respectful of the topic and the real, like, human suffering that is at the root of what this story is about. And so so anyway, yay for Dignidad Literaria. And I just have to say also that, you know, I'm deeply disturbed by some of our literary heroes who went to bat for that book. You know, and that definitely was a huge disappointment. And I think it also illuminated how, you know, that we as authors also have to be mindful not to just kind of endorse something without really vetting it, without really kind of truly believing it, you know, and not just kind of playing the political game. And I understand it on some level because, you know, because of what you were saying, Romina, right? We're fighting for the same seat, you know, at the table. But I think that you know, with the movement of Dignidad Literaria and all of us presenting books into the world about the topic, we now have a little more we can be a little more discriminate about what we endorse, and
Yes.
and I actually have to tip my hat to some of those writers who did step back and say, you know what, oh, I goofed, I'm sorry, you know. But the ones who held their ground, boy, oof.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we'll move on. So yes, this was, we talk, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the incredible Nigerian writer, says, she has this wonderful TED Talk where she points out the danger of a single story, right? And that was kind of at the crux of the problem with American Dirt, because they were, they had deemed it the American story. I think one of our heroes called it El Libro de las Américas.
Mm-hmm.
So this single story, the danger in it. What does Latinx literature about immigration fall victim to this concept? And please share your ideas about why this may or may not be true. Also, tell us how you think your book adds to or shatters this conception.
Okay, I'll start. I hate to, like, the silence kills me. I'm just going to jump in there. So I think that Chimamanda's TED Talk is incredible. Google it, watch it. It's amazing. I think that for the single story of any identity, and obviously we know Latinidad is not a monolith. I think a lot of people who are not Latinos and are maybe Americans don't understand that, and I have whatever. I don't know what to say about that. But I think that the danger of the single story is from what I think that Yamile was saying about how we buy into it and how we limit ourselves by thinking what can be accepted by the marketplace. So there's that. And when we're told, oh, we already bought one immigration story and what this is the more palatable kind of immigration story. So it comes from publishing messages that we get that this is the one story. But then also, like growing up, it was very difficult to find myself, and I know all of you have similar things, in kid literature. Find my experiences, I don't mean exactly my experiences, just something akin to.
Mm-hmm.
Until I read the graphic novels, the comics, Love and Rockets by the Hernandez brothers. I don't know if you're familiar with them. It changed my whole world around to see these girls representing me. I was like blown away, and it gave me a confidence to write about, kids and people like that. And I think one of the ways to sort of break out of expectations of a single story is to include all intersections. So in this story, we have a girl from El Salvador who speaks really perfect English. So yes, it's accented, but she knows English. She has a love of language. She loves American TV and American TV shows, and she's queer. And that is something that, again, I would never have seen growing up in my experience. But, and one of the things, I was talking to a friend recently about immigrant parents thinking that queerness is an American thing. Los americanos,
Hello.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you're like, so allowing kids to see that intersection, like, sort of disrupts the idea of a single story. Just one of the ways, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. I feel like in my book, I also break the stereotype because my characters are second-generation American. And sometimes people have the misconception that once you have your magical little paper, all your problems are solved, and that you are immediately accepted into the community where you live. And that is not the case. If you don't have a support system, or if you still are seen as the other because of your skin color or because of your name, it's going to be very hard to be part of that homogeneous community. And especially with my character Minerva, she has the audacity of wanting to be the president to represent the whole of the United States, which seems like such a far-fetched idea to everybody around her, because of course that is something that people can't even imagine. But the fact that she is an American and that she grew up thinking and believing that she could become anything that she dreamed of shows her Americanness, even if outwardly she doesn't look like it for a lot of people. And also, on my book, I touch about the point of how our children of color sometimes don't have the opportunity to enjoy their childhoods, that because of their circumstances of growing up in poverty, or because of the color of their skin, they're supposed to grow up much sooner than their Caucasian counterparts. And that's such a shame. My character can't wait to grow up. She hates Peter Pan. And I'm happy that throughout the story, she gets the little chance to be a child just when she's on the threshold of puberty. And that's where the title of the book comes from. On these magic shores is a line from Peter Pan that says that when we're grown-ups, we can only look back on those magic shores of childhood. And when she's on the verge of living the years that she couldn't really enjoy, she realizes that there was a lot of magic in her life that she couldn't appreciate, but she's determined to give herself the gift of being a kid for as long as she can. So I think that's my contribution to the Latinx immigration canon, showing how these second generation Americans have all this, the privilege of sometimes living in legality or having papers, but at the same time carrying over their shoulders the expectations of all the generations before them, and all these big expectations for them to have great lives, and that sometimes they don't feel like they have the freedom to have their own life that they dream of.
Mm-hmm. Who wants to go?
You don't have to answer this question if you don't feel like it.
Well, I mean, I don't think that there's a danger, because, as you know, Alex and Shami already pointed out, there are so many different types of immigrant stories. You know, everybody's, yes, immigration is a shared experience that I think people can really kind of see the similarities within, but there are also so many different types of immigration stories, and everybody's experience, everybody's specific experience is different from even the person sitting right next to them that might be on the exact same journey. In my book, you know, I try to highlight how all those stories can be very similar, and they can just have all these different outcomes and all these different things that people are carrying with them on their journey. And so it really comes down to the character, you know, and honoring that character and making that character's story be true, as true as possible. And if that character, if you're able to do that, then I think, you know, you really do see that there's not just this one story that is a one size fits all, you know, for every immigrant.
I agree. I would just add, like, that I think basically all of us we're different. Like, every single immigrant is a completely different human being with different experiences, different things that color them, and like no one is infallible, you know? So like, just because someone is an immigrant or comes from another background doesn't mean they're right. It means they have a different point of view. I think that like part of the thing that unites us is this lack of home or of one place, you know? That idea of like, okay, you were born or your parents were born in another country and you're born in this country. Now you're kind of having to navigate this, like, well, who am I and how can I define myself in like the smallest amount of words, you know, when it's not going to happen, you know? And so, so I feel like that's why the own voices and not one story narrative is so important, because we kind of like own voices is so inclusive because we get at the universal through the personal. And so the more and more personal the story is, the absolutely more relatable it's going to be. And again, I think that comes from us, from being an immigrant, being not so much a label, but a state of being, an ability to see, like to be in that border in between things, to color outside the lines, to kind of not be limited by a certain perspective that you're born into because you've had to travel past it.
Yeah, I think that the problem, a single story becomes becomes one when I think it's mandated, right? So if we look at in the canon, what is let in by the gatekeepers, that is, you know, that is funneling out to the readers. That's when, that's where the danger lies. It's not that we're not writing it. It's not that we don't have the creative capacity. I think the Latinx community has a very long literary tradition about responding to the issues of migration and immigration. You know, our codexes, you know, in the Americas wrote about our migrations. Those are our first immigrant stories, right? So like, I think that, you know, the problem lies with the gatekeepers, and that's why, again, dignidad literaria is more important. But I also think that we also have to be able to continue to write and continue to expand the canon and with nuance and all of these incredible you know, personal first-hand accounts of what we experience. All right, so let's see, guys, what's mine? We're almost down to our very last questions, but it's great because we still got a little more time. So in terms of, you know, I think you mentioned this, Romina, a little bit. How do you make the unique universal in telling a story about immigration, right? Does your genre that you're writing in, does it help or hinder in this regard? Is it a challenge given the age of the audience you're trying to reach? I know Jami and I, we're writing middle grade. So talk a little bit about the craft, how to find the unique and the universal.
Sure. Should I start?
Yeah.
Okay.
And your genre too,
Yes, absolutely. So Lobizona is, I don't know if you would call it contemporary fantasy, urban fantasy. I don't know what the exact sub thing would be for it, but that's kind of what I love about YA. It's like this genreless genre, right? Like you can write any kind of YA, really. The point is, what makes it a YA is that you're writing it with that teen in mind. You know, that's the only thing that distinguishes a YA from an adult book narrated by a teen. One of them is not thinking about that teen. The other one is constantly in dialogue with that teen. So I think that that's why I didn't really care that much about genre when writing this one, which was a bit of a gamble because, you know, people like to categorize, which is a big theme of this book, how we like to label and classify and how silly that is, especially now when we're all hybridized, you know, like there is no one thing anymore. Sorry, purity test. You know, so I kind of did. I branched out, and you know, I wanted to make this unique, and it's an approach I actually use for all my books, which is something that Alan Watts said. That's we're not born into this world; we're born from it. And I think that's such a crucial distinction that we forget sometimes. Like we look like this because we were of this soil. Were we planted in another soil, we would have grown completely different. And so I definitely like to get back to that. So even though Manu, my protagonist, is in many cases has a lot of similarities with my own immigrant experience, I definitely need to make sure that I'm telling her story and not my own. And so that's a big part of that, is kind of like centering myself in her perspective and seeing how she would approach this, not just as like someone who's in this other world and comes from two worlds and doesn't really have a home and isn't sure where she belongs and why man-made borders matter more than people. But she's also a teen. So what defines YA is first, you know, it's your first exposure to so many feelings, so many things, so many concepts, so many people. So it's like having the combination of that with this experience, and I'm sure you can talk about it with the Gravekeeper and everything, but it's like that kind of notion of like firsts, but then also first being in this like horrible sort of scandalized, you know, world. So that's true for a lot of teens who crossed the border and who found themselves in cages or separated from their families. I read so many stories of teens coming over with their sibling or with someone alone, just that level of desperation. So the fact that what they were escaping was so much more bleak than the prospect of this journey and not making it, there are no words for that. There are no, and so the idea of using fantasy for that, you know, and the reason I do, and I even address this in the book because the character asks, how come Latin American authors use so much magical realism? Why do we resort to fantasy? And it's like, and her kind of surrogate grandmother figure tells her, because sometimes reality strays so far from what's rational that we can only explain it through fantasy.
Exactly.
And I think ultimately, I think it links into Alex's book probably too.
That's my cue. Okay. Yeah, I think that my book having a speculative element is really what Romina said, in that you hear, and also Jami said this before, numbers sort of distance you and, sort of like kind of protect you a little bit from the horror of these real situations. So the way to combat that is to put an element that is sort of like, oh, and it's a little startling, and it's a little like, wait, is that real? I've had people ask me, does that really exist? And I'd be like, not that I know of. God, I hope not. But I think, so just making it a little bit sort of beyond our real world pushes people to think about, wait a minute, these are real people who are making real sacrifices, who are willing to put their bodies and their emotions and their souls on the line to protect their, in Marisol's case, to protect their sister. And what that means for a teen, like Romina was saying, is that those big emotions and the first time being in love and feeling, duty and guilt and shame about all those things, and for me, so this sort of, to backtrack a little bit, I was born in New Jersey, so I'm not an immigrant myself. My parents are immigrants, but one of the things that I wanted to discuss with this that does affect my life is mental health issues. Mental illness is another thing on the short list of things that are para los americanos y no para nosotros is being gay and having mental illness. Those two things we don't have. I don't know what. Guys, where did it come from? It's obviously not us. It must be America. It must be America.
It's in the water.
It's in the water. Si comes en casa, you don't have this problem. But yeah, so I think that I really wanted to, the genre allowed me to push people a little further into the horror that is real right now. By sort of like upsetting their expectations, being like, and putting that on sort of uncertain footing. So I think genre for me was helpful in that way, because sometimes people get, sort of beaten. Oh, that's my mom. I'm sorry.
I love it.
Mama, no me llames because I'm on the, and then it was her. Okay. Anyway.
Okay.
No.
That's great. I love it.
I'm scared for you because you just canceled our call.
I know. Now you let her know that you're okay. I'm still home. I promise.
You should have answered her FaceTime and then screen shared so we could bring your mom into this. That would have been.
No, please, do not give her. She will take. ¿Con quién estás hablando? A ver. No.
A ver, Jenny, can you talk about the unique and universal and how you made that happen in your book? Because your characters are on La Bestia, right? They're writing La Bestia and they're coming across, half a continent.
Yeah, and I haven't had that experience. I haven't had to flee for my life, and I haven't had to ride La Bestia and know what that is about. For me, it really just comes down to getting on a very personal level with my character and really opening my heart to what they are feeling and understanding what that must be like, and trying to be a medium, I guess, that writes this down and is able to share it with others. So I tried to make it universal and just trying to be as true to my characters as possible. I really feel that they are real, and they have this story, and they have this story to tell. And if I can just tap into that, if I can just, tap into their hearts and really listen and understand, then then that's how I can make it universal. That's how I can make it something that reaches other hearts. So, you know, that's all that I can do. I hope that I do it well. I don't, you know, am I going to go and get on La Bestia, and would that research be, you know, like bring me a truer sense of exactly the hardships? Yes, it would, but it's unrealistic for me to do that as a mother, you know? So I really had to just listen to my characters and imagine this and picture this. And I think that this is why we all write, is because we really are able to imagine and picture what our characters are going through, and then try to communicate it as best as we can in the written form.
I agree. I have no werewolf experience, you guys. Just FYI.
No kidding. Well, like I was saying, although I didn't lose my mom when I was a little girl, you know, I tapped into those emotions that I was feeling that felt were universal. The desire to still, you know, to be safe in your mother's arm or in a caretaker's arms, the desire to be free to become whatever you are, or to have true friends who wouldn't care about the place where you live or the clothes that you wear. So those are my characters' dreams and desires that are very unique to every child her age. And I feel like when we look back, like I said, on those magic shores of childhood, the reader can empathize with what she's feeling, even though she's in a very delicate situation in her life when she has to take care of her sisters, so she doesn't know where her mom is, and she's so worried about her mom having been taken away by the authorities. She still finds time to laugh about things with her friend and her sisters, because children will always find the magic in their lives no matter what the circumstances. So the magical elements in my book just contrast, you know, the terrible things that happen in her life, that sometimes people are more skeptical about the real things, the racism that she encounters or the microaggressions. I've found people being like more critical of that, like, could that really happen? But never about the magical elements. So that's been a really interesting experience to see how sometimes we're more willing to believe in fairies leaving a golden coin for a girl, or in a little, you know, magical mouse that comes to leave a coin for a tooth, than in believing that a child can be attacked for something, for coming to this country and being born of immigrant parents. So the magical realism aspect of the book gave me the opportunity to explore these two worlds that the character is living in, just because she's, like I said, on the verge of puberty, and she's like in this limbo in so many ways, in a limbo between languages, between stages in her life, between living her two lives at home and being a different person at school. So it just gave me the opportunity to explore things that real life wouldn't allow me to.
So for me, I wrote, this book is in verse. And, you know, I think when you write in verse, you have to be, it's a kind of, you're shining a light on the soul, the emotion of the character. And so I had no room to do anything but, and this character is the youngest character I've written yet. She's 9 years old, and it's still considered a middle grade novel, because middle grade is 8 years old to about 12 years old. And so and it's written in first person. So I had to be very mindful about the language and be very mindful about what she knew, you know, because to make sure that I wasn't writing, you know, what an adult knew, and that all of the information she was learning just like a child would be learning, and how incredibly difficult it was to be in a situation that she largely had no control over. But, you know, the book, I really wanted, like Yamile said, I really wanted to make sure that I communicated these universal truths, which are, you know, the desire to write and to create poetry, and how that can be an agent of change, how that is, even in your darkest hour, you can create light because you have agency, because you have the power. And so that's really what I wanted to communicate with the book. All right, so I'm not going to ask our last question, which was a really good question, because it asked about what was the most inspiring thing that you learned throughout, because I just wanted to transition over and give us a little more time, to answer some of these questions that came through. Let's see. I think we answered this one that said, "What are the how do you handle the fantastical elements with the contemporary?" You just said. Can you talk about the research process for your book on immigration? Did you visit Hieleras, write La Bestia, interviews? You talked a little bit about it, but maybe quickly, if you can limit your answers to just like maybe a minute, that would make it so that we can answer more questions.
So like probably a lot of people here, I have family members and friends who, you know, I don't want to, like, basically have had to, you know, different statuses and everything, like, in coming over here. And like, obviously all of this is it's hard to talk about because people are scared, you know? So I'm just going to say, I talked to a lot of people. I also talked to about 7 or 8 immigration lawyers. And I was like, but could this happen? But could that happen? Because one of the things is that there's quotas, deportation quotas that the administration set up. And they're like, one of them didn't even catch it because he was like, honestly, I could see that happening tomorrow. So like, he's like, this isn't even a stretch, you know? And that was obviously where we were before all this stuff hit and when it was happening. But so basically, yeah, just talking, getting everyone's experiences into my brain so I can be reflective of it.
Yeah, awesome. I did the same thing. I have a lot of family members. I've had, you know, cousins who have been detained. I've talked to them, and growing up, you know, I heard a lot of stories of family members and community of what, you know, what immigrating to the United States has been like. So I grew up with that information, with that knowledge. And so I drew on that, you know, I drew on a lot of people that I've talked to, and on journalists who are covering and putting themselves in harm's way to make sure that these stories are brought to light. You know, I'm writing a novel. They are out there risking their lives to you know, write their books or to write articles, to shout to the world, to try to bring attention to this problem. And so, you know, the journalists to me and reporters are heroes who are really out there doing that work. And I relied heavily on them, especially Oscar Martinez, who wrote La Bestia. And it's an incredible book that has, you know, so much information about what writing La Bestia is really like. And he wrote it several times. I believe in something that I read or heard that he's written it about 6 times. So, you know, did a lot of research with nonfiction books and articles, as well as, you know, talk to family members and community.
Yeah, I would say, I just wanted to piggyback off of that real quickly. Just that, you know, journalists are really important, I agree, but I think that, you know, even within the journalist community, not everybody needs to be taken seriously. You know, we have to be very mindful if you're starting to do research, that you're not following journalists who are new to the beat, you know, new to covering immigration because it just happened to pop off and it's a trend, and to make sure, because their lens is totally different. And but to also follow journalists that are a lot of Latinx journalists, like Aura Abogado, Tina, oh my God, I'm forgetting her last name. Tina Vasquez, sorry. Tina Vasquez, Roberto Lovato. I was going to call her Tina Lovato, and Roberto Lovato is one of my friends. Sorry, I don't know why. I married them for a second. No, but these journalists are critical of not exposing our pain, on our suffering, just for commodification, which is actually another question that came up here. You know, like, do you worry about commodifying your writing and your identity? You can answer both questions about your research and whether or not your books, were you mindful of not commodifying or exposing immigrant pain just for entertainment's sake? You know, were you thinking about that?
Absolutely. That was at the forefront of my mind, and every word that I wrote was, you know, very, very carefully chosen. And, you know, I wrote this book thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking so much about how can I tell this story in a way that doesn't glorify, you know, pain and violence and struggle, but is truthful and authentic to what that experience is. And I think that that's incredibly important, is to have that at the forefront of your mind and to be truthful about, sorry, my battery's going low. To be truthful about the violence and the danger that is very real and people are running from, but to be mindful that, you know, to put humanity at the forefront and be truthful about that violence, but let that violence be in the background, you know, but really let the character and who they are and what they feel to be the most important when you're writing something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think for me it was also important to show that my character had agency and that the outcome of the story depended on her. Although she's a kid and so many things happen that she has zero control over, still her little happily ever after comes because of her actions, and not to just be part of a stereotype, but to be true to herself and to follow on the promise that she makes the reader at the beginning of the story.
Right, to not allow them to just be victims.
Exactly, and not just be a little puppet that, you know, it goes through perhaps readers' expectations, but that she has her own agency, even until the end, even if it's something that the reader would not have chosen for her, but it's true to who she is.
Yeah.
All right, so how about you tell us, Angelica has two questions. What are some of your favorite literary classics, and one art, song, movie, artwork, or event takes you back to your childhood? Well, let's just answer the first one. How about what are your literary classics in regards to this canon? You have?
Well, one of my literary heroes is called Alma Maritano. Mostly American audiences don't know who she is. She was an Argentine author. She was born in my hometown, Rosario, Argentina, and she wrote authentic stories about children living their everyday life. But to them, they were big adventures, all in the background of the dictatorship happening in Argentina at the end of the 70s. And when I first read her stories, I didn't even know the name of the author because of censorship. Although when I was in school, Argentina was already in a democracy. It took a long time for democracy to trickle down to regular society. So the books that my teachers used to teach literature and reading and writing at school were just little primers with little story abstracts without the name of the author. And I fell in love with her stories even before I knew who she was. And she showed me that there is a space for stories about kids like I was back in those days. And if I was true to those stories, there would be somebody to complete the writing cycle of reading the story. I always say, like, the story cycle is not completed until somebody reads the story and makes it their own. So Alma showed me that if I wrote these intimate stories, there would be a reader one day. And
can you type out her name in the chat? I think
yes,
asking.
Yes. Alma Maritano.
Alma Maritano. Right. Anybody else? I can go on to a next question. Oh, anybody?
Oh, no. I was just going to say that my book, like my character's reading Cien Años de Soledad, and she's basically trying to finish it throughout the whole book. Actually, like, will life stop happening so that I can finish this book? And that's one of my favorites.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had already mentioned Love and Rockets before. You know, it's a comic book, but it's really amazing. And growing up when I did in a place where in northern New Jersey, where we were close to a lot of immigrant communities, but where we actually lived was very white and very homogenous. And we were, I mean, when you look at me, I know I don't go into the sun porque, you know, I'm kind of emo, but when I am the brownest person in a community, you have a problem. So seriously. So, but one of the things, so I didn't feel connected to my culture until we went back to Uruguay every Christmas, and I started listening. You guys are going to laugh. I started listening with my grandmother to tango, Carlos Gardel. Weird thing happened to me. I became obsessed with Carlos Gardel, and maybe, Yami, you know this poet, Alfonsina Stormy?
Of course, yes.
So, my emo goth heart, like, went, and it was like, so that, even though that, like, I felt disconnected from a culture in a lot of ways, those things were like little anchors that I could find. And the nice thing about it was that they were a little quirky, a little different, not what sort of on, I don't know if you guys had when you were growing up, International Day, where people sort of dragged out their like flags and stuff, and it would be like the most sort of cliched thing from their country. And that was hard, you know, that was really hard but to have this sort of like little quirky kind of things that I found that were really, I really love that. I did also, because my mother made me, I just saw somebody posted on the chat, Las Venas Abiertas de Latinoamérica.
Yes.
I read that also when I was in college, and that rocked my world too.
Yes.
Right. And then, you know, for me, I was also going to write El Norte. I can't remember the Rodriguez, I think, or who was, no. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. El Norte. El Norte is the is a movie that
yes.
Was really beautiful. And also, of course, you know, all of the people that you heard during the American Dirt scandal, everybody was like, oh wait, but, you know, so just do a search and you can find who to read instead of American Dirt.
I saw El Norte when I was very, very young. You know, I think it came on like Univision or something one night. And that movie, I remember it making such an impression on me as a little kid.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And also,
go.
Sorry. Like the music that I grew up with, my dad, you know, was like constantly blasting rancheras every weekend. You know, like my dad's from El Salvador, but he loves Mexican rancheras, and so that music to me has a lot of story in it, and you know, that's what I grew up on, was like listening to these stories, you know, through music. So that made a huge impression on me. Los Tigres del Norte, Vicente Fernández, Los Bucks, you know, Bronco, all of those bands, and later on in life, you know, I found Lila Downs, who is amazing too. So for me, I find a lot of story in music.
Absolutely. My husband is an ethnomusicologist, and he talks about the in fact, he's got this class called Salsa for Social Change, right? And where he documented how Latin American music, the Caribbean music in particular, really is the voice of the people. And so I
Yes.
totally agree with that. Absolutely. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to Habla de Oro so many times, you know, and that song, you know, just talks about the migration experience and being in the United States and, you know, being like supposedly being free and having, you know, living this life that is fantastic and still feeling like you're in a cage. And so those songs made a huge impression on me growing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's so many songs about liberation. If you look at across Latin America, like Mercedes Sosa or
Yes.
Rodriguez, and you know, and even now, you know, you have newer artists who are a little more politicized. Well, okay, I think we've come to the end. You know, there's some great questions here, but you know, I know that your time is precious. I don't want to keep you, but there's like, you know, we didn't answer what are our predictions about publishing industry in this decade, which is a good question. And where you think, what do you think the 1.5 trillion buying power of the Latinx community, why we're not commanding more books? So that's a really good question. So, but maybe you guys just can leave us with you know, what you know, what you found to be the most inspiring and healing in your exploration and your efforts to make your story known.
I think that for me, it has been, and I know this is probably going to be everybody's in a way, or anyway, this is my first book. So having readers come to me and saying, I am Marisol. This happened to me. This is my experience. And how did you know? And or this is exactly my experience with mental illness. How did you know? And a lot of it is what Jenny said, like as writers, this is what we do. This is how we can take information and dig deep into ourselves and sort of create these things that seem very real, have real pieces of us as well. But knowing that I could like saw someone in a way that they have never been seen, I could just be like, all right, good night, I'm done. That is the most amazing thing. And I don't think anything else will top that. I really don't.
No, exactly.
That's exactly true.
Yeah. No, for me has been not with Magic Shores yet because it's not out, but with Where Are You From? When I get pictures from teachers or librarians with their students, little poems that they wrote inspired by Where Are You From? That's something that just made my heart glow, because it's like their little, like my book was just a little jumping board for them to produce things even more beautiful than I could have ever dreamed. So I know that if my words inspire somebody to tell their own story, I've done my job as a creator.
Yeah, I would say representation, you know, when you get a message from someone that's like, they see themselves reflected, and that's all I've been getting about Lo Visona, and it's not even out yet, you know, and so many people are like, seeing my culture, coming across words in Spanish in a book, you know, it would seem so, you know, easy somehow, you know, to us, you know, we take it for granted, but then we don't think about where everybody is and what context they're growing up in. You know, like Alex was saying, like, you don't know who's surrounding them. You don't know what narratives are making it to their ears. You know, the life is telephone. You know, we have no idea what's getting to them. And so, like, being able to do that is so cool. And we still have a long way to go. Like, I actually, one of my trade reviews that was great and everything, mentioned this, like, the fact that I had Spanish and translated to English a little tedious or something. It was, like, probably one of the most, like, privileged, like, things of, like, unaware privilege I've seen written about my stuff, because I was like it's a good and it's a big, you know, probably and I'm like, did you just, like, in the era of post-American dirt, say that it was tedious to have like a Spanish author include actual Spanish? Because, like, read the room, you know. And I would say, like, the only experience I've had, because this isn't out yet, with Zodiac, I wanted to share that hopefully feels a little inspiring, is that when I wrote Zodiac in English, of course, and then it was translated into Spanish, and I got a chance to read the Spanish translation, spit into it with my own thoughts on certain words, and you know, it's sci-fi, so it's like everything's made up words, so you want it to feel good. And there was, you know, when it comes out in English first, like you get all the reviews and you see people pull quotes and things they connect with. When the Spanish version came out and people in Spanish started putting their blogs in the quote, they were picking a quote that was something that my dad had said to me and my sister our whole lives, that in English, nobody looked at. Like it went over every reader's head. And when it was in Spanish, every reader was plucking it and putting it in the thing. And it's, my dad, he always says this, he's like, no matter what the world takes from you, they will take your job, they will take your house, they will take your everything from you. They cannot take what's in your heart and in your head. That is what's yours. That is your wealth. And I wrote this in this, and it's funny how, you know, in a country that kind of takes its freedom of speech and everything for granted, maybe kids wouldn't resonate as much with that. But in countries that have seen dictatorships spring up, where like every word has a price, you know, a line like that would really resonate. And I think that's so cool, you know?
Yeah. Well, I was thrilled that you have a Yamile in your book. I was like,
that's my cousin's name.
I've never seen my almost name in a book in English.
I haven't seen mine either yet. Somebody.
Yeah.
It's coming. It's coming.
It's coming. Yeah.
Jenny, you still with us? Jenny, is she frozen? Oh, she froze. I bet you her phone died.
Her phone, yes.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Oh, there you
yes,
are.
there you are.
I can't see you guys anymore, but there we go. What I find inspiring, this is my 5th book, and what I find inspiring is, you know, the idea, because it hasn't gone out yet, but the idea that, you know, at some point somebody will read this and say, somebody paid attention to my pain. Yeah. And somebody paid attention to my struggle, and somebody saw what was happening to us and wrote it down to make sure that others would know about it as well. So writing this book was very difficult. It was very emotional. It was, you know, I don't know. I was like in this whole other world for the whole time that I wrote it. And, you know, just like in a very emotional and painful, you know, state of mind, because it does deal with difficult topics and difficult issues. But what gave me hope was that someday it would make somebody feel seen and understood, and that somebody bore witness. So.
Yeah, that's such a powerful concept to bear witness.
Yeah.
Alex, you already said you spoke, right?
Did, yeah.
You did.
I was actually just thinking about one of the characters in Jenny's book, Beguenia, and how she bears witness, and it's so beautiful. And you gotta get this book.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I would say for me, you know, I just echo everything that you all say. To me, the most inspiring thing that I've experienced is because it's not out, but you know, I've read, a few people have read the book and have written me personal letters already. They're adults, of course, but yeah, and so it's been their response. And if I can move like this, there was this one reader who I was really scared that they were gonna read it, but they read and they really, really loved it, and that was really a kind of like a bendición. You know, I am scared about what, you know, the backlash is going to be. I'm scared about, you know, the conditions the world it's going to be born into, you know, or from, and I hope that we find that this book is kind of like and all of our books really are a battle cry, you know, to continue to fight and continue to protest. Our voices are actually a protest against the inhumanity that we're seeing take place across the world, but really in the United States for us, and to our communities. And so yeah, so I'm hopeful and inspired, and hopefully we can continue to make some change. All right, well, thank you all. Las Musas is fantastic.
Thank you all.
Our madrinas, Jenny and Romina, are our madrinas because they're published authors. And now Alex and Yamile and I were the part of the debut group last year, but now we are madrinas. So this is...
We're madrinas. We graduated.
And we hope that this conversation was fruitful to all of you out in the world. And please get in touch with us via our website and via our social media accounts. Yes?
I have a question.
Yes.
So I know we're recording this. Where will it be available?
It'll be up on Las Musas YouTube channel.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, you can find it at our YouTube channel, and reach out to us and onward. I hope your stories out there in the world will blossom and continue to
all of our stories.
tell our truth.
Yes. Excellent.
Bueno, queridos. Queridos.
Gracias. Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye bye.
Oh, wait. Before you leave. Oh, she left. Darn. I wanted us to put up our books, all of us at once. Pero bueno.
I took a photo without the books, but I took a picture.
Okay, so that's good. We got something.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Adios. Ciao.
Adios.